are going to cover the Indian Council Act 1861. In the previous video, we have covered in very detail the Indian Act of 1858. So, in which we have covered about the Queen's Proclamation, significance of Queen's Proclamation, power of the Secretary, and all. so, so let's start Indian Council Act of 1861. So after taking the administration of India directly into their hands, which was in 1858, the British government passed an act which is also known as Indian Council Act of 1861. Through this, the British government made the first attempt, first important changes in the structure of the government of India after the 1858, and the acts began the dual process of Indianization. Indianization means Bharatiya and the decentralization means the powers which were once concentrated in the hands of the company were now spread across, as we spread in the hands of governors and their council members. So we will see it later, and that gradually led to the Indian self-government. So with this spreading decentralizations, gradually people started demanding their own self-government because they get the knowledge. Also, we will see that educations played very important roles, Western educations, and establishment of the form smaller groups of Indians together came, so that they influenced the British for the self-government, and which we took in 1947. So also the act also provided a framework of government which continued with minor modification uh, till the end of the British rule in India. Now, factor responsible for the passing of the Act of 1861. Let's see what was the factors that was responsible for the passing of the Act of 1861. So, need to bring reforms in the administration. So there, even before the outbreak of the Indian Mutiny, the British authorities had expressed their dissatisfaction with the working of administrative system in India, but no concrete steps was taken to remove these defects, because ultimately the rule was of the company, and they were not caring as much. Also, after the end of the rules of the company, the British government felt the need to take concrete steps in this direction, which led to the passing of the Indian Act of 1861. Number second reason was to fulfill the promise made with the Indians. As we have seen, Queen Britain Queen made some certain promises like religious freedom, in taking part in progress of India, etc. So for the fulfillment of those promises, the act was required, and the concrete steps was taken in this direction through this Act of 1861. Also, there was need to end the mistrust between the Indians and the Britishers. So the revolt of 1857 had created a mistrust between the Indians and the Britishers, which led to be ended, so that a mutual trust was built among them. So through these acts, British government provided some of the opportunities, some of the freedom, some of the participations in the government, so that mutual trust can be rebuilt. Also, the demand by Indians for reforms was one of the factor for the passing of the Act of 1861. So, though the Government of India Act 1850 had brought striking changes in the home government, but it did not introduce any change in the general framework of the Indian government. Means in home government, later participation was given, and as we have seen, though participation was given, but the voice were ultimate voice was of the Britishers. So. And there was no change in the general framework of the Indian government as before, like East India Company, which was ruling. The rules, they rule, Britishers rule in the same way, and for a say purpose only, it was said that non-official members will be uh, included in the participations or parliaments. So the Indians demanded these reforms, and the Indians wanted it that more changes should be brought in the administrative system. India urged the government in England to enact their constitutional measures. Means, as I have said you earlier, that Indians have started going to the Britons and foreigners for their study. Elite Indians started going for studies in abroad, and there they came to know about the working of the British constitutions, and also Western education as was increased in India. So people became aware of the constitutional demands, their rights, their duties. So they started asking for more government control of their own and freedoms. Also, need for administrative decentralization. We will later decentralize, as I have discussed the topic decentralization, and we will later see how this decentralization helps India to gain a lot of controls, and to increase the participation in the government. So before 1861, the Governor General had excessive centralized power, making governance difficult. As we have seen in the previous videos, that Governor General, which was the ultimate controller of the East India companies and had ultimate powers to take decisions in the affairs of the running of the India. So through this act, the act aimed to revive legislative council at the province level, means at the sort of states level. It was admired to and increase the that's a participations and to improve local governance. Also, this have the British better control India by distributing responsibilities. Number six factor which was responsible for the passing of the act was British desire to gain support from the Indian elites. Basically, after the passing of the 1851, within 2 years, that they came to know that without Indian supports, it will be very difficult to run the administration. So they wanted to gain the supports of the Indian elites, like zamindars and princesses. So that they can control the Indian trades commerce more effectively. So after the 1857, the British realized that alienating means naraj karna. Alienating Indian rulers and elites was dangerous, as they have seen through the revolts of the 1857 that what was the Indians capable of. So by allowing nominated Indian members in the legislative council, the act created an illusion of participation. As I have said you, it was just like illusion, since there was no professional say of the Indian members. Only few non-official members were elected in those legislative councils, and also the ultimate say was of the British officers, in the way that if certain acts was to be made, a certain law was to be made, then it needed the ultimate permission of the Governor General, which was who was ultimately taking the care of the Britishers, their crown. So basically, it was just an illusion, and this was meant to ensure loyalty from Indian provinces, landlords, and elites. So through these illusions, things they wanted to gain supports of the Indians, and securing the cooperation with British, so that they can cooperate more with the British officials. Also, number seven, the factor is that strengthening British political control. So the act allowed the Viceroy to expand his executive councils. So by including more British officials. So they increased. Were allowed to increase more British officials, and the numbers of the non-official members, who was ultimately the jamindars and provincial princess. So basically, they were not the true representatives of the Indians peoples. And another thing was that the increased British members could uh, means that they can make a greater contribution to change the directions of the discussions. So this ensured that important decisions remained in the British hands, while minor discussions could involve Indians, and the British government could still override Indian councils, maintaining full control. Number eight is British liberal reforms and pressure for changes. in Britain, liberal politicians supported limited reforms in Indians. Basically, during the time of 1861, liberalizations was going in the British Britain. So basically, the liberal politicians thought that some of the limited reforms should be given to India. But here, don't confuse that. They were goods, but basically they were saying that after granting sub representation they would stabilize British rule, and the act was to a step towards modernizing government, even though it was largely symbolic. Means it overall it was a symbolic things, but liberals wanted to make sure Indians that they are participating in their governance, and so they may contribute and supports the British officers. Also, expansion of British territories in India. By 1860, the British had consolidated vast areas in India. So the main one of the main factor was their increased territories, and so to control them effectively, they needed decentralization and the Indians cooperations. So for this purpose only, the governing such a large territories required regional legislative councils to handle local affairs. So they allowed decentralization, and as I said you, they though they allowed decentralization, so though they allowed the powers in the hands of the Indians and small of British smaller bodies, but most of the members in those bodies were Britishers. It means Europeans, or the peoples who take interest in the betterment of a Britain crown. So basically, though the act allowed decentralization, but British authority was not compromised. Also, economic trade and consideration was one of the factors for the bringing of the 1861, because to control such a huge resources, they needed they needed big governments. Sorry, they needed a smaller governments to control those traded effectively and economic activities effectively. So the British economy depended on India's resources, trade and revenue. A stable government was necessary to attract investments, and the thing was that if Indians do not cooperate, then the stability of a government was hindered. So basically, they and therefore they allowed that Indian members could participate in the governance or provinces through the Act of 1861. So by including Indian elites in council, the British aimed to secure economic cooperation from powerful landowners and merchants. As I have said you, only powerful merchants and landowners were allowed to take parts in that. Councils, legislative councils, and these were elected by the governor general. So basically, it's one thing that we know that landowners and princes, most of the times they were not representatives of the common Indians. So this was the main factor, were the main factor responsible for the passing of the Act of 1861. So for now, let's stop. In the next video, we will see the main provision of the 1861. So thank you.